with big companies, you spend a lot of time working with them trying to apply lean startup principles. So where do you think companies are getting it right, and where do you think they're getting it wrong, and why?
I think that most companies just do not have the constancy of purpose to do anything. Like, they're so short term, and they're so getting buffeted by outside forces, and they're so like caught in this gravitational pull that pulls them down to bureaucracy and lethargy. Like, it's kind of sad. Even when the CEO or like a top executive says, we want to make a change, they feel trapped in the culture that they have. So that is unfortunately very common. Like, the conditions for big companies to actually do corporate transformation are very specific. And it requires like quite the level of determination by the senior leadership, by the board, to carry it through.
Eric, thanks for joining us. I think you and I met back in 2010, so it's been some time when you were writing Lean Startup. Actually, you were writing the blog first, and I think that's how I first got connected to you. And I know you hear this all the time, but genuinely changed my life. Like, actually, in fact, statistically significant, changed my life. Then 2017, you wrote Startup Way, which I think was interesting because it brought the lean startup more into the corporate world, into the enterprise world. Bigger focus on culture and entrepreneurial management, which are topics we'll talk about. You've worked with a lot of big companies, a lot of startups, helping them innovate better and faster. And that's the intersection that Marcus and I live in every single day as a corporate venture studio and venture capital firm. And so we know a lot of big companies and corporate innovators are struggling with questions about long-term thinking, governance, financial gravity, trustworthiness. So those are the topics that we're excited to dig into today.
Some of my favorites. Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're doing it, right? So let me start with this. You know, with big companies, you spend a lot of time working with them trying to apply lean startup principles. So where do you think companies are getting it right, and where do you think they're getting it wrong, and why?
Well, first of all, thanks for the kind words. And yeah, it has been a long, strange trip. I guess we're going on 15 years now. So thanks for being an apostle all these years. Yeah, it's been awesome to watch what the whole movement has become, and you played a big part of that. So thank you. What do big companies get right, and what do they get wrong? How much time do you have? I mean, it's
well, we have about 400 questions, so take your time.
Yeah, we've shrunk here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, well, after we spend 3 hours on this one, maybe we'll have time for the other ones. I joke because there's so many ways to get it wrong. It's kind of incredible. And I think that most companies, just, if I'm being really honest, just do not have the constancy of purpose to do anything. Like, they're so short term, and they're so getting buffeted by outside forces, and they're so like caught in this gravitational pull that pulls them down to bureaucracy and lethargy. Like, it's kind of sad. So even when the CEO or like a top executive says, we want to make a change, they feel trapped in the culture that they have. So then, like, when they go to implement lean startup, that's what's really interesting to me. I used to think, like, I remember one of the first big companies that I ever worked with, they were total cowboys. You know, it was like a very chaotic environment. And I thought this was going to be great. They had very poor process. You know, like, they were interested in innovation because they were getting their butt kicked. They were in an old legacy industry. They were getting absolutely disrupted. And if I said the name of the company, you'd be like, oh yeah, are they still around? Like, oh my God, they're getting crushed.
Are they around? Are they still around?
Devastating. You know what? These big companies do not die quickly. So I actually think they are still around. But and I haven't talked to them in ages, but for reasons you'll understand in a second. Anyway, so I was like, this is the perfect condition. Burning platform, absolute total disruption. I was kind of like, nothing to lose. And they totally got it. Every person I talked to was like, yeah, our whole business is going away. I remember sitting in their beautiful gleaming office tower in like an old, industrial core hollowed out place, just gorgeous, massive tower, like such a relic of another time. And in the lobby, as I'm waiting for them to let me into security, because God forbid I would steal their precious trade secrets, they had their annual report as the light reading on the coffee table. That was it. No magazine, just their own company's annual report. So I was like, okay, well, I got nothing else to do. I read their annual report. The annual report is like, hi, shareholders, we are so doomed and dead, but we're going to totally figure it out. So like, it was like very clear. They did not have any confusion about the disruption. So I was like, this is a great setup. And I went in there and I had one of the best workshops I've ever had. The teams that I worked with were like super excited. Senior exec, everyone was super excited. They're like, this is a great idea. We're going to change everything. And I was like, are you worried about your corporate process? They're like, nope. We're going to do it all. I was like, this is going to be great. So we make a new plan. They're going to do lean startup, whatever. And we did a couple workshops. Everything was going great. And I didn't hear from them for a little while. And then like I came back for the follow-up and I was like, how's it going? And they're like, oh, we're crushing it. It's going great. I was like, cool. Did you like build all those MVPs we talked about? They're like, oh no. It's like, have you built anything at all since? No way. No. We're crushing it because we decided to have these meetings and we're doing blue ocean strategy and we're doing this thing. I was like, but I thought when I was there, you said you're going to do this thing. They're like, that's true. But then the next day, some other guy came by and told us to do something different. And then we got excited about that. And then this other executive said, no, don't do that. Do blue ocean strategy. And I was like, and then the other, like they had been through like 5 quote unquote pivots since I had seen them, none of which had involved actually making anything at all. So that is unfortunately very common. Like the conditions for big companies to actually do corporate transformation are very specific. And it requires like quite the level of determination by the senior leadership, by the board, to carry it through. And so, yeah, like if you get it right, it's incredibly powerful. And I don't mean to say that you can't get it right in small ways. What I've seen in a lot of cases is like individual teams, divisions, like subsections will do the proof of concept. And that can set the stage for the larger transformation. But what's really interesting to me is how many ways you can go wrong. Like, because we put this thing into a chaotic system that's not that, not really that performance oriented. Like, yeah, it's like a million different ways it can get effed up. It's pretty funny.
So the most common organizational barrier then was maybe the lack of alignment to purpose, you think? That's what you've experienced. And so do you think a venture studio construct may be part of the solution?
Well, the details awfully matter. And the issue with venture studios is actually like if you I don't have a copy of the Startup Way in front of me, but if I did, there's literally a diagram in the Startup Way where I tried to identify all of the places on the modern org chart of big companies where entrepreneurship takes place, whether they admit it or not. So like every division, there's new products being introduced. Sometimes if there's uncertainty and there's a new product, boy, you're doing entrepreneurship. I don't care what you call it. But every new policy, every functional division of the company. So every like gatekeeper function, whenever they roll out a new policy, like that's the same as if you started a company to sell some new IT product into a big company. We all understand that that's risky and uncertain. Well, every time you do it, congratulations, you're doing entrepreneurship. Anyway, so there's quite a few places. And of course, at the corporate level, we do entrepreneurship too when we do a joint venture or we have a new strategic initiative from the chairman's office or when we do a venture studio. And the curse of entrepreneurship is if the project is in the right place on the org chart, it has a chance of success. And if we only knew in advance which things we're going to need to go where, we wouldn't have to do entrepreneurship. The uncertainty is more uncertain than people actually process. So the hard part of a venture studio is not getting the things started. It's transplanting them back into the correct soil once you know what they are. That's usually where things fall apart. And that is why constancy of purpose is such a critical attribute of companies. When we talk about venture capitalists, the highest compliment you can give a VC is that they have high conviction, independent conviction, the ability to make up their own mind, not follow the herd, but actually decide if something makes sense and make the investment on that basis. The VCs I admire the most are the people who I've seen do that over and over again. They're not always right, but they're not weak. And so what we need is corporate executives who have that same conviction that it's like, I'm not saying it's that hard to get a new thing started, actually. The hard part is do you know it when you see it? If you invent the new thing, can you actually nurture it and grow it? So yeah, I think companies that are true to purpose are not just chasing quarterly returns. They're not just chasing their short-term metrics. Like they're not just kind of trapped in the financial gravity of our current system. They are the only ones really that have a chance to sustain conviction over time such that then a venture studio, like they could reap the rewards of the investments they make. Otherwise, it's going to be like Xerox PARC or, all these famous R&D labs. Like think about how many companies, Kodak inventing the digital camera. Like we all know these stories. They're everywhere of companies that could have been the leader in the new thing. Like, look, everyone who worked at OpenAI, where did they work before? Like, it's unbelievable what could have been if the big companies who had those technologies in their own labs had the constancy of purpose necessary to commercialize them.
What other conditions, other than that consistency of purpose, are required that you've seen that have said, hey, that company is got it right or is getting it right? Because getting it right sounds like they just won and they call it a day. And I know it's never quite like that, but what are those other elements that you've seen? Is it, like you mentioned, where it is in the org chart? So where should it be in the org chart? What other elements are needed to give things a better chance of, you mentioned conviction, which sounds a little bit like the culture of the company, but what are those other elements that really you've seen work where people don't just do a workshop and say rah rah? And I've lived that, by the way, I've lived that experience too, right? With lean analytics, where you go in, everybody gets pumped, and it never materializes. So what do you need? What are the ingredients that you've seen work?
So successful transformation has to evolve over 3 phases. And one of the problems, as is true in all kinds of entrepreneurship, is that what you need in every given phase is different than what you needed before, and often the opposite. So that's very confusing. So people always ask me, is it bottoms up or tops down? It's like, well, it depends. Everyone hates, like, what do you mean it depends? Everyone hates that answer. I don't want depends. Just say, give me
I'll cross the question off our list, Eric. Damn it.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely frustrating. Look, if there was an easy answer to these things, everybody would do it. And like in a capitalist system, there would be no room for you there'd be no profits to be made by doing it because everyone else would have already done it. The good news is it's incredibly hard. So if you do it, you reap tremendous advantage. So in phase 1, we have to demonstrate the viability of whatever the innovation system is in our unique culture and context. So the grassroots, that's why I do one-off workshops. Even still, even after you've seen it go wrong so many times, you never know when it's going to catch fire. If you never try sparks, you never know. So you have to do the initial stages of it. And what that looks like is really individual teams trying to do things differently. So we have to find, do we have a middle manager or an executive somewhere who will sponsor some teams? Like when I first did this at GE, this is the old GE now, 3 managements ago. But this was one I will never forget. The chairman of the company was doing his offsite retreat with 400 of his top senior executives from around the world. And he asked me to come in and speak to the executives. I've done that many times now. I was like, sure, no problem. Come in and speak to them. He's like, but also while you're here, will you do a workshop for one of my teams? He's like, I don't want to just hear about this in the abstract. I want to see it with my own eyes that it works for our companies. Whatever you want, boss man. Sure. And he's like, okay, I'm going to choose the team though. I don't want some software thing from California. F that. I want you to prove to me that you can make this work for whatever I choose. Okay. And he chooses a gas turbine being developed in Texas for power generation and transportation. And I was like, sure. Only one question. What is a gas turbine?
Yeah.
Is it an engine or a turbine or a this or a that? And he was like, no, sorry. See, I just made the mistake. It was a gas engine, not a gas turbine, but I kept using the wrong word. Everyone thinks engine and turbine is the same thing. Oh no, I learned the hard way, but not that well, as you can tell. Anyway, I was like, is it bigger than a bread box? Smaller? Like, what is it? I did not know anything about it. He's like, perfect. That's what I want. Okay. So we go in and we do the workshop, and just so you could visualize the scene. I'm in one of those I'm up in Crotonville, the famous GE, learning center. One of these beautiful tiered seating, like MIT style, Harvard Business School style classrooms. And it's me up at the front. They've flown in 3 guys from Texas to do this workshop with me who are working on this project.
Just 3
people. In the back
people.
of the room, they have 25 corporate executives.
Okay.
Just to observe.
Oh, jeez.
Absorb.
Can you imagine these poor guys from Texas?
Bizarre.
I felt so bad for them. Like what a nightmare of a workshop setup. Just complete and utter devastation. I was like, sorry guys, I'm sorry. This was not my idea. I'm really sorry. Yeah. But like at GE, the culture was like the boss says jump, you say how high. Like so they were like. I didn't realize this at the time. I felt bad for them, but this was a big career booster for them. Like they're going to get this airtime for these senior executives. On the other hand, they have to listen to this idiot from California tell them what to do. And if they say it's a good idea, then they must be stupid because they didn't know that. If they say it's a bad idea, they're saying the chairman made a bad choice to make the guy from California come in here. So it's very much a catch-22. Anyway, so we start the workshop and it's like, yeah, you tell me. I was like, could you just present to me and all of us, what is the plan for this project? I don't know what it is, so you better teach me about this thing. And they did a great job. They took the currently approved business plan, they presented it, huge projector in the front of it, like way bigger than me are these huge bar charts of like, I'll never forget, revenue forecast by year for the next 30 years. And it's of course got the beautiful hockey stick shaped forecast. And I was like, look, I don't know anything about gas engines, but guys, now you're in my office. Like the hockey stick shaped growth curve. This I know quite well.
Love those. Big fan.
Yeah. I know. Now I know what to do. And I'm like, okay, everyone raise your hand if you believe this forecast. And they were so pissed at me. They're like, kid, you obviously don't understand. The brightest minds of the GE Corporation have like thoroughly vetted this. Our finance team, we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars on the base of this forecast. And everyone's hand goes up. And I'm like, okay, with all respect, I get it. But no, really. Who here believes in the year 2045, you're going to make this much revenue? I just read it off the chart. And they're like, well, I'm like, exactly, $4.5 billion exactly. And they're like, well, not so sure. And it's like, okay, can we have a real, anyway, so that's how it starts. That led to a massive program. We did so much good stuff at GE. And we'll get back to what happened because, activists basically took the thing apart. And no matter how good you make the management system, there's these other forces that lurk. So we can come back to that. But like that really is the essence of phase one. Like one team, one project at a time. We did these cohorts. We did 4 projects at a time. Then we did 8 projects at a time. Then we did 16 projects at a time. And we had done hundreds of projects while the company was still deciding whether this was a good idea or not. And what was so great about that was, we did everything by exception. Every project had an executive sponsor. And when we would run into issues with the company's bureaucracy, the executive sponsor would be called to clear them. Well, at a certain point, this gets really non-scalable. You're up against the company's full-on bureaucracy. So eventually you have to graduate out of phase one into phase two, where you need somebody who has the authority to say, okay, we're committed, let's go. And that happened. Chairman said, okay, I've seen enough. And that was really the key. Like we had these executive sponsors and these key people that were like, we had basically what we called a growth board, like our board of directors for the change, were 5 senior executives, all of whom reported to the chairman personally. And he didn't pick pushovers. We had some skeptics on that board. They were like, what is this thing? They had to see it to believe it. But when they did, like the key to this whole thing is they had conviction. I'll never forget the CTO of GE sitting with me being like, I don't think this is a good idea, but I've been told I have to do this. So what's the plan? And I was like, well, first of all, you're going to send me one of your teams. After 3 days with me, what can I show you that would make you believe? And he's a scientist. He's like, well, I need to see the evidence. Evidence of what? He's like, well, he thought about it. He's like, if you can improve cycle time, I'm a believer. It's like, yes, sir. So like after 3 days, we took that project from 5 months cycle time, 5 years cycle down to 6 months. He was like, this is like an order of magnitude improvement in 3 days. How'd you do it? What's the trick? I was like, sir, there's no trick. And I walked him through that. And like he saw, we did that over and over again. He was like, oh, I'm a believer now. Anyway, so the company became a believer and they rolled it out company-wide. And it went from being super bottoms up distributed to very tops down by fiat. You have to do this. And we could talk about all the things you do it. What's interesting is most people think that's the end of the story, when in fact, that is the preseason. That is just earning the right to tackle the actual problem, which is the deep systems of the corporation. We trained like 100,000 people or more. I mean, I've never trained. That's the biggest training program I ever built. It was an incredible feat of logistics. The logistics of it were unbelievable. They were so good at it. But even after we had at the peak of our training power, we'd only trained like 1/3 of the company. GE's a big company. And more importantly, it doesn't count for anything until you tackle how are people compensated? How do they get promoted? I felt it. There was like a disturbance in the force one day when all these senior executives started calling me for advice that usually wouldn't give me the time of day. Usually I have to call them. Now they're calling me. And I couldn't figure out what happened. And finally someone took me aside and been like, well, they've changed. Just so you know, this is supposed to be a secret. No one's supposed to know this. I was like, but somehow everybody knows it? Yeah, it's supposed to be a secret. They've changed the criteria for promotion to officer to include innovation. So all these people calling you are people on the fast track to promotion. And they've somehow figured out that this is important to their political future in the company. It was like, anyway, you start messing with that stuff, you see real
with the system, really with the actual system,
with the system. So we had to change compensation, promotion, budgeting, how resources are allocated. The third rail stuff that everyone says, you cannot touch that or you will die. And when I tell people this, I feel bad actually having written a whole book where I said, look, this is what you're going to have to do, because many people, when they hear that, they either say, this proves that transformation is impossible, or they say, great, well, why don't we just start with that? That'd be a lot easier. And it's like, well, after you get electrocuted, call me back. Like that's the problem. You don't have, people refuse to accept the political nature of transformation. And so I was like, look, you don't have the political capital. You don't have the power to do this. So what are you doing? Anyway, so that's how it plays out. And so, yeah, it requires, it's like a very delicate thing. You have to really take it seriously. And far too many people don't.
Yeah, Eric, you're seeing a lot of growth innovation now also happening beyond the core. Just what's your take on just from your lens, beyond GE and other experiences that you've had over the years? Well, from the perspective of, transformation ends up being, the H1 and the fringe of ideas that are kind of spinning out, like big companies spinning out new products, setting up corporate venture arms on the outside, leveraging corporate venture capital as another tool, to effectively, really push forward transformation on the outside. Just from your lens and perspective, just how you're seeing, lean being applied on the outside.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is like, in Silicon Valley, people don't know me for my transformation work at all. It's funny. There's like two completely different populations of the world have read these two books and know me for two different things. And both groups think what the other group does is stupid and a waste of time. So it's actually like funny when I bring them together. They're like, who are you? What are you doing here? So like obviously like a huge amount of innovation that's happening in startups and, in a place like Silicon Valley, and is like really off the wall compared to what big companies are used to. And yet these two groups need each other. First of all, because many startups, they're going to end their life being acquired by a big company. But the ones that don't are going to become big companies themselves. So like the ultimate corporate transformation is the emerging from the chrysalis of a startup into a major enterprise. And many people start companies because they hate big companies. And I always ask people, if you hate big companies so much, why are you trying to create a new one? Like, what are you doing? And what's your plan for having it have a different outcome than what we are normally seeing? So like I think generally speaking, at both the corporate level and in the startup ecosystem, we greatly underappreciate how difficult these gravitational issues are. And so we were like living through a time, Cory Doctorow, I think, has the best term for it. He calls it enshittification, which is like, it's profane, but I'm just like, let's get right to it. We all know this is true. Many, many, many products that we rely on every day are actively getting worse, especially tech platforms, because they become quasi monopolies and they just exploit the hell out of that position to their own self-destruction. And so what are we doing? Like, I feel like there's a part of us that we're like sleepwalking into this phenomenon, and we could do a lot better. Like, I think a lot of value is being destroyed in the world by companies that have like lost their integrity, and startups that are growing up into things that their founders abhor. And it's like, why? I don't really understand why we're doing that. And the crazy part of it is, and maybe this is going to sound vain, but I have personally helped people make literally billions of dollars in my career. Like, I'm not exaggerating. I know many, many billionaires who were not billionaires when I met them. And I don't begrudge any of them their success. Like, I don't have any jealousy about it. I think it's wonderful. I actually think that capitalism can be a force for tremendous good in the world. What pisses me off is how miserable they are. Like, I know so many people who are so unbelievably rich. This is not billionaires only. Like, I know a lot of people who are very, very, very wealthy beyond all historical norms, and like so wealthy that their families for generations will be living off the wealth that they created, and they're totally miserable. And, some of them are having a very public, psychological meltdown right in public. So you could watch it for yourself. Do those people seem happy to you? I don't think so. So I don't really understand. We are sacrificing the souls of these companies in the name of profit so that we can make money and then be miserable. What are we doing? Like, I really don't understand it. So like, yeah, I think it's absolutely time for a change in the root philosophy of what we're doing as the business community, as organization builders. And yeah, I think it's frankly overdue.
Got it. Interesting. And by the way, the GE stuff you mentioned, that was a couple management, people, executive leadership ago. So do you know where GE is at with it now? Did some of what you did there, the work that you did it survive, or did it kind of die on the vine as management switched over? Because, part of it is like public, CEOs of public companies don't have a super long tenure.
No, I know. And that used to be one of the things that made GE different. And it's kind of It's been a bit not like that. It's been more conventional since then. The truth is, I don't know. Most of the people I worked with were laid off in the immediate aftermath of these gyrations, and the ones that stayed were like, "Listen, we have to rebrand everything." Like they're like, I did get some calls in the like the year or two after, but like, actually, this thing survived, that thing survived, but we had to rebrand it, rename it, do this, and yeah, like I don't. The press wanted to write a story that I was responsible somehow for GE's turnaround when it looks like it was going to work. And then they wanted to write that I was responsible for its downfall when it looked like it didn't work. I was like, guys, I appreciate being seen as some important factor here. Like I was a bit player in the grand scheme of things, especially because, and I didn't even know this, during the time I was working with GE, like it was under this tremendous activist pressure. And they spent something like, I want to say $20 billion on stock buybacks, $20 billion. Plus, they spent untold billions on these acquisitions that were just designed to like boost the stock price. And I was sitting there being like, man, when the things went bad, can you imagine how valuable it would have been to have an extra $20 billion sitting around So it's just like a classic dysfunction where companies like they buy back their stock when it's high and they sell it when it's low, which is like, it's just the exact, you're supposed to buy low, sell high. Companies do the exact opposite under activist pressure. It's totally insane. So yeah, I got to see the dysfunction up close. And it was part of what radicalized me, in the years to come about like, oh, we need more fundamental reform here, because the reality is, and I saw this at P&G too, I was there when they were having their activist campaign and obviously counseled many, many people through this over the years. Like, no matter how good your management system is, you're up against these gravitational forces. So if you're blind to that, you can have lots of good work be undone. It's kind of sad.
And so on the governance side, you've used this term strong governance, and you've said that traditional strong governance can actually weaken companies. So I'm curious, what do you mean by that, and what are the alternatives that you're thinking about or proposing? Like, how would you change governance structures of organizations, with respect to innovation, or more broadly, that you say like this is going to be better than this other thing?
Sure. Like most people don't know what the word governance means. That's really the first problem. And we don't agree, our society, we don't agree about what is good corporate governance. We paper over these disagreements to a great degree, but it's easy to show you that this is not true. So for example, if I go to Washington, D.C. or New York or San Francisco, and I ask poobahs in that place, what is good governance? I will get 3 very different answers, like shockingly different answers. And I can pick specific scenarios. So for example, I'll talk to a founder and say, hey, you're making some amazing product. It's really exciting. It's worth X dollars per share right now. And I always ask founders, tell me who you think the most evil company in the world is. And it's funny the answers you get to that question. There's actually quite a range of different answers I've gotten. But for me, my father was a pulmonologist growing up. So to me, the most evil company in the world will always be Philip Morris. Tobacco to me is like the ultimate evil product. Serves no benefit whatsoever. Has killed so many people. Like Europeans committed genocide for the privilege to plant tobacco and have enslaved people farm it and then feed it to themselves so they could die of lung cancer. Like who was the winner of this absolutely epic, world historical level disaster? Nobody should be proud of that. So Philip Morris. Okay. But you could substitute with your own favorite, most evil company privately. They come to you and say, listen, I'd like to buy your company for $1 more per share than it's worth. So I'll just pay you X plus $1 per share. Would you like to sell it to me? Now, what is good governance in this situation? Every founder I've ever done this exercise with is like, well, they either give me 2 answers. One answer is, hell no, I would never do that under any circumstances. Of course not. But the more sophisticated ones will say, well, what do they want to use it for? Right? Like maybe it's for something good. I'm like, oh no, they tell you, we are going to use this to sell tobacco to children. Okay, that's our plan. Now, every founder I've ever met, when revealed with this information, say, well, no, the good governance would be, I have the power to resist this evil act. If you go to Wall Street and ask people, what is good governance in this situation? They will say, well, how is it for shareholders? They're going to make money or lose money? I'm like, well, they're going to make money. They have stock worth X, and they're going to get X plus 1. Good governance is the shareholders have the right to force this situation. And if you go to DC, you will have people say, oh, it is a crime to say no. You are obligated. You have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders. If you say no, you could be sued. You've committed securities fraud. You could go to prison. You come back and tell founders that that's what people on the East Coast say. It's so monstrous they don't believe me. They're like, you must have heard them wrong. That can't possibly be right. And I've learned, I'll be like, look, with all respect, if I pull your Delaware charter right now and read your governing documents, I bet you it says you have this fiduciary duty. And they're like, no way, man. My lawyer, my buddy, Mike, it's always like some dude. He's my buddy. He wouldn't have set me up with that. So I've learned to be like, why don't you call Mike, ask him this question, to ask him what is good governance in this situation, and call me back. And they're like, you're not going to believe what Mike said. I'm like, oh, I'll believe it. Oh, let me guess. Did he say this? Were you tapping the conversation? I'm like, what do you want? Mike thinks he's doing you a favor. Okay. He thinks he's helping you raise money by showing your obeisance to an investor dominated world. And they're like, I feel so betrayed. So what are we doing? Like, honestly, what are we doing in that situation? Who could possibly say it's the right thing to do, that these companies should be destroyed for the sake of a quick buck? So what's really wild about it? So the question is like, what is strong governance? And in the investor world, like there's a research paper recently was showing how strong governance leads to weak companies, because strong governance just means investors can do literally whatever they want. Investors rule everything around. We live in the era of shareholder supremacy, and it's been a disaster of an era. I don't think we have that much to be proud of with this switch in our philosophy of company building, but certainly founders and company builders, managers shouldn't be psyched about this. This has been a total disaster. In fact, it's the internal contradiction of the whole ESG movement, because the E and the S are about long-term thinking and sustainability, and the G is about investors being in charge. And look what the results of that been. Of course, the G trumps the other two things. So I know companies like that are really truly making pioneering improvements to like transform the climate for the future, for the better, have low ESG ratings because they are founder controlled. But they're only making those investments because they're founder controlled. If we lost the founder control, the other things wouldn't matter for 1 second. So I think our whole idea about what constitutes good governance is like utterly backwards. Now, the critics of this idea will say, hold on. You're saying no accountability for managers, right? Like that's the problem. That's why we don't want managers. And that's fair. If you look at the Business Roundtable, did this letter a while ago talking about multi-stakeholder governance and the new future of the company is, blah, blah, blah. That was all, we call it fake holders in my world. Because, and it was amazing about it is that letter was signed right before the pandemic. And some academic had a brilliant idea to see whether people who signed that letter actually treated their stakeholders any better than the ones who didn't. And they found it was actually negatively correlated with things like exploitation, because people signed the letter to get the quick, it was like, oh, great. Now I have no accountability. I can do whatever I want. What do I want? I want to exploit. It's like, oh, great. That's terrible. So what we need, I think, as an industry, as an ecosystem, as a movement, what we need is an affirmative vision that's not anti-shareholder, but pro something else. What is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? And so I don't want founder-controlled companies. I don't want shareholder-controlled companies. I want mission-controlled companies. Companies that have that constancy of purpose, that have fidelity to some higher principle. Those are the kind of companies that can build this very particular asset called trustworthiness. We in our modern world have totally lost the idea that trust is an asset that we don't account for, and therefore we lose. And that's why people look around and say, like, how come nothing works anymore? Why is everything so broken? Why are institutions so weak? This is why. It's like the marrow in the bones has been sapped. So yeah, they're weak. And we're now living with the consequences. But it doesn't have to be that way. We could do much better.
I mean, what you're proposing in kind of modern governance is really stakeholder alignment beyond shareholders in some ways, right? So the old model was about maximizing profit at all costs. And now we're looking at stakeholders tied to a long-term vision and mission.
Well, yes and no. I don't like the multi-stakeholder paradigm. First of all, because nobody can tell me what a stakeholder is. Like, we can't even agree about what that word means. It just means not shareholders, but that's not helpful. Like, our enemies are not our stakeholders. So who are my allies and who are my enemies? We can't even say. And our shareholders are not our enemies either. Like, I spent a long time talking about the power of long-term investors and why they're so important. But short-term investors are great too. They're just like tourists. The citizens of the public are the long-term investors. The tourists are the short-term investors. Nobody says that they think tourists should be able to borrow money and buy up as many votes as they want and vote in our elections. Like, that would be insane. But that's the system we run for most companies. It's an idea so bad, they don't even study it in political science departments because it's so self-evidently stupid. So, so we got some issues to do. But the other part of your question is right. The idea is not to align around multi-stakeholderism. I don't think that's going to work because that's fundamentally a compromise. And business is about synthesis, not compromise. So, for example, I'm thinking about lowering prices. Well, customers love that, but maybe my employees don't love it. My shareholders are worried about it. Oh, no, sorry. I mean, I'm raising prices. So now my customers don't like it, but my vendors love it, right? Like my stakeholders don't agree about what I should do. And the things I do to help one stakeholder harm other stakeholders sometimes. So if we're just trying to do multi-stakeholder, it's like, I don't know, a little of this, a little of that. It's like, it's very weak, I think.
Trying to get everybody to agree to one thing.
Yeah, it's like it's basically a consensus-driven organization. Good luck with that, man. It's hard. So I think it's much more better to say, no, our goal is to find synthesis. We are looking for solutions that maximize the total human flourishing of all the people we touch. And actually, I would go so far as to say the issue is not that we've misdefined governance. The issue is that we've misdefined what it means to make a profit. We literally don't know what it means to make a profit. The word profit is misunderstood. I think to make a profit is to maximize human flourishing. That's literally what it means. So when someone says, we will criticize a company for putting profits over people, I'm like, that's impossible. If you really understood what it means to make a profit, you would say that that cannot be done. And of course, then you're like, but wait, you're telling me that most of these companies that I'm criticizing for being exploitative are not profitable? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So like, it's a radical statement, and people get freaked out by it. So you're like, well, are any companies by that definition profitable? I'm like, I know a couple, but like the data is very clear actually that that's true.
Yeah, but probably not many companies, because like I remember starting a company in the recruitment space in 2007, and you ask any CEO, what's the most important thing to your organization, and they'll say the people. The people are the top. The people who work inside my organization are the most important thing. And yet I remember trying to sell to HR and sort of describing HR, like, first of all, not at the seat, before there were chief people officers, like one step above janitorial staff. And that's not trying to be dismissive of janitorial staff. It's just they had no power. So I think if profit is human flourishing, maybe there are a few companies that are there, but I don't know that how many really truly believe that that's the case.
No, it's quite rare, and it's sad. I think, the problem is right there in the name human resource. It's like humans are not a resource. Resources are consumed. And so one of the problems we have is we have bought into this ideology that if a company has so-called negative externalities, that's too bad, but it's just how it is. So it's like, so therefore, like a company that pollutes or that creates toxic waste or whatever and doesn't clean it up, like that's not, that's like we really, everyone knows we really ought to do something about that, to fix our accounting standards, to make them like that's like very obvious. Every economics person will say, yeah, we should do that, but then we never get around to doing it. But like even beyond negative, we don't even have a word for like, what about a company whose business model depends on the destruction of human lives in order to run the machine that it does? So it consumes human resources and destroys them and makes money. We have a lot of companies that fit that bill. And the reason I can know that so with confidence is that everyone I tell that story to knows what company I'm talking about. But if you ask them what company am I talking about, they'll say 100 different companies. So what are we doing? So again, imagine I had a lemonade stand and I'm like, my lemonade stand is profitable. And like, really? How much do you charge for lemonade? 10 cents a cup. How could it be profitable? You're like, well, I stole the lemons. So I don't pay for ingredients. So I'm profitable. Most
good
people
margins.
are like, yeah, I got great margins because I just walk into the grocery store and steal lemons with a gunpoint. Like, is that, so I ask people, is that company profitable? Most people are like, no, that's not profitable. It's like, why not? They're like, well, it's illegal to steal the lemons. Like, but what if I made so much money, I could lobby the government to get the laws changed so it was legal for me to steal the inputs? Now is it profitable? And they're like, no, but it's immoral to steal. It's like, okay, but is it, I hear you that it's immoral, but is it profit? Anyway, you push people on this and they'll finally be like, I guess it's not profitable. Like, okay, good. Now, what if I'm a hitman and I make money by killing people? Is that profitable? And they're like, well, no, that's illegal. And I'm like, well, what if I made so much money as a hitman? It's just, you do the same exercise. What if I got the laws changed? Well, it's immoral. I was like, what if I make so much money? I start my own religion and my religion says it is moral. Now, is it profit? You could push and push and push and push. Like, people just really don't want to say that making a hitman is profitable because, and I know why, I've been doing this exercise a long time now. The moral basis of capitalism is that voluntary exchange creates surplus value. And that means everybody's better off when we make money, when we create value. If you push any defender of capitalism on why should the system be protected, they always retreat to the fact that people are better off. So I'm like, okay, if human flourishing is the moral basis, what about an act like murder that is manifestly anti-human flourishing because I've consumed a human life in order to make money, people were like, well, but how can you ever really know? We would like totally equivocate, like, the world is so complicated, you can't really know. It's like, but we live in an era of surveillance capitalism. We mean you can't know? I can tell you exactly how many people died. Like when Facebook is implicated in genocide, they commissioned research about it. They know exactly how many people they killed. So what are we doing? Anyway, I think it's actually, if you really step back and think about it, we've just made a mistake. It's not some like catastrophic, like complicated thing. It's like, look, this isn't right. And we could do better. People want to work at a company that they can trust. People want to buy products from a company that thinks it has their back. Like investors, long-term investors want to invest in companies that are trustworthy. So I'm like, if we have a way of building companies that gives the employees, the customers, and the shareholders what they actually want, why is that considered radical? Like, I actually think it's kind of the dumbest, stupidest, most obvious strategy on the planet. Let's just give the people what they want and see what happens. And of course, talk to any academic who studies this. They're like, oh yeah, everyone knows that this is more profitable. I'm like, well, if everyone knows it, why aren't we doing it?
You talked about trustworthiness a lot. So is there a way to quantify and measure trustworthiness in a business context where it's like you can say, I think we can all say, oh, we think that company's more trustworthy. We feel like that company's more trustworthy. But if somebody says, hey, I want to buy into this idea, and I know trustworthiness is only one part of it, but is there a way of measuring it? And then maybe like the other part of that question for me is, how do you balance innovation and taking risks as a company? You say, I want to go do things that are maybe will seem a little bit crazy or radical to our own employees, to the customers. How do you balance that while maintaining trustworthiness at the same time?
I think you have it backwards. I don't think you can do it at all unless people trust you. Like, this is the thing people don't get. So like when I talk to people about this, they're like, man, business is already so hard. You know, I can't communicate with my employees. My customers don't trust me. Like, one of the huge issues we wrote in IT, so innovation in IT, the number one issue when we talk about making releases more frequent so we can actually experiment. The number one thing I hear every time is like, but our customers hate it when we make it a release. Making a release is so difficult. They hate it. They yell at us. They're really upset. They don't like it. They're cranky. Da, 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 da. So yeah, the business is already so hard. Now you're going to make it harder? Come on. But I respond the same way. Well, is it possible that the reason that business is so hard for you is nobody trusts you? What if your employees believed what you were saying? Would you have to repeat yourself over and over and over again? How many people you guys must hear this. Every CEO I meet, every manager I meet, it's like, man, employee communication is so hard. I got to repeat myself 50 times. No, the companies that actually are good places to work and people trust the leadership they don't complain about that. They say something one time, people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And they just go about their business not because they're great super communicators, but because first of all, they have built up trust with their employees. So the employees know that there's not like a hidden agenda. You have to like decode what do they really mean. But secondly, the business model that they're asking people to operate makes sense at the level of the human heart. Because exploitation is hard to explain to people because you have to obfuscate it. If you were like, actually, we're murdering people for money, most people wouldn't work there. So you have to be like, actually, we're maximizing shareholder value or by increasing customer engagement by making our product super addictive. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean addictive. I meant highly engaging. We have to like at the point where people are like, well, what's our product again? What does it do? What is it? So that's the first thing is we have to recognize that. So innovation requires trust with customers, with employees, because like we're going to make mistakes. The whole nature of innovation is you're going to go out there and try something and fail, and you need the failure to not be catastrophic. If people are running,
right, so to that point, Eric, like if you don't have trust, the innovation, the risks you take, the things you ask of customers, the bets you make are way harder.
It's way harder. In fact, most big companies that I work with have to take their corporate brand off the innovation just to do the experiment.
Right. And what do you think about that? Like, do you think that makes sense at all?
It's an absolute requirement. It's a requirement for two reasons. One is most corporate brands are highly protected. So you're not right. So people are worried, oh no, I'm going to ruin the brand by attaching it to something that people don't like. But those same companies are like, but do people like your brand? Is that you're protecting it, but is it positive? So the real reason is that most brands are hyper specifically associated with specific products rather than with an idea. Think about the really great brands, the transcendent brands like Nike, like Apple. Like when Apple launches a new product, no one's like, what does Apple know about launching a new product? What right do they have? When Nike does something that's aspirational, people are like, yeah, that's their brand. But most brands are crap. Most brands are like about a specific product that only half works and I can't stand having to buy it. So you attach that brand to a new product, just like, oh, not again.
Right. So you create a new brand.
Yeah. So of course, so
disassociate.
Yeah. So you have to do that. But if you have a good brand, a brand that people actually like and that people have an open-hearted trust relationship with, it's very easy to just be like, yeah, of course. And again, like, I mean, Apple's the king of that. But there's plenty of brands that people trust enough that you feel like, yeah, when they do a new thing, you're not reflexively suspicious about it. But it also goes back to the first thing that we talked about with venture studios, where the other problem is, like, the most depressing experience you can have in a modern corporation, I think, is to go take a tour of their research lab and meet the researchers and ask them this question. Bring a violin with you so you can play that sad music. Tell me about some scientific breakthroughs that you have had in the lab here that have not been commercialized. And it'll be like, yeah, I got a cure for cancer here on the shelf. I got infinite power over here, teleportation. I got this, this.
Wait, have you seen these things? Just let me ask you.
He probably has, yeah.
These are not hypotheticals. I remember I was in a thing where this, like, yeah, we have this thing where you hang your clothes up in your closet and it can come out dry cleaned for you. And I was like, where can I buy it? They're like, nobody wants it. Like, nobody wants it. I was like, can I buy it from you right now? Can I have it? I mean, right, big, like, things big and small, diapers that don't leak. I've seen so many amazing things where you're just like, how is that in the lab and I can't have it? Don't even get me started on AI. It's a disaster zone of things. It's like, what a cool demo. Why can't I buy that? Okay. Why does this happen? Well, the same reason we talked about before. You spend all this money to develop it, but then you have to hand it off to some commercial organization that doesn't trust you. And they're like, what am I supposed to do with this? The dry cleaning guys were like, well, this is going to hurt our laundry sales. It's like, yeah, it's going to hurt your laundry sales. Yeah. But we spent all this money to invent this thing. It's like, what are we doing? This is insane. So we really can do better if we recognize that being trusted is the foundation that allows this innovation to proceed. And it's not just trust with customers. Obviously, trust with our employees is important. And also trust with investors. If you innovate and your stock tanks every time you do it, you're going to stop doing it. And that's what happens to too many companies. Yeah.
And I think, if we think back to corporate venturing and investing into innovation, and I just love the concept of human flourishing. And the question is, how can structures like corporate venture capital structures that are evergreen, that take a different horizon, often can basically be the catalyst to really support human flourishing versus like traditional 10-year cycles or even being within larger corporations. So I think there really is a role to have these corporate venturing structures living on the outside and having funding vehicles with longer time horizons to support that. So
yeah, we don't experiment with that nearly enough. Like, corporate venture should have a major advantage because it's evergreen structure. And I think basically the venture ecosystem would benefit from permanent funds a lot more than it does now. These short-term, 10 years is not that long. So these short-term funds are just, these disposable funds are actually a problem. And we've moved to a world of multi-strategy funds and crossover funds. But then you have this problem where you make an investment in a company and it graduates out of the fund. And now it's like it's partnered with a new company, right? Like, my board member was from the early stage practice. Well, I'm not early stage anymore. Now I got this new pro. Who's this new person? Like, you talk to the public markets people in crossover funds. They don't invest in public companies. They inherit public companies from the private company. They're constantly like, why'd you invest in this? I don't want this. Now you've got someone on your board who doesn't want to be there. It's terrible. We could do way better.
Awesome. Eric, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Always
an interesting conversation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And shout out to Lean Analytics going strong after all these years, man. Like, it's still great.
That. Let's save that. Yeah. You know what? My royalty checks are nowhere near as big as your royalty checks, I'm sure. But every month, I can take my family out for one dinner because of Lean Analytics. Not translated into as many languages, but still pretty cool.
I'll give you a clip you can use then, because I have said this to people many, many, many times. Lean Analytics is great, and the content of it is really good. But it's by itself, just the examples in the back that show the benchmark metrics for different industries, different categories, that is worth the price of admission by itself. Most entrepreneurs have never seen any other company's dashboard but themselves and have no idea whether what they're doing is good or bad. Like, just the benchmarking power of it is so underrated. So thanks for writing that. It's been awesome. It's been a real treat to watch that go strong all these years.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, appreciate it.
See you.